Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really zeroing in on something I think a lot of us wrestle with when chasing goals. This idea of grit.
Hmm.
You've shared some really fascinating material, and we're going to try and unpack what grit actually means and, well, why it might just be more crucial for success than raw talent.
Right. Which is kind of counterintuitive sometimes.
Exactly. The sources, they take us everywhere from like West Point's intense training to the business world. So our mission today is really to figure out what stands out as most insightful, maybe even surprising, about grit for you, the listener.
Yeah, and it's a great topic because, we often put talent on this pedestal,
Totally.
but the material kicks off by challenging that whole idea.
Yeah.
The author mentions her own father, who was apparently worried his kids weren't, exceptionally bright.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then boom, contrast that with the fact that she later gets a MacArthur Fellowship, the Genius Grant.
Right, the Genius Grant. So that immediately makes you question, okay, what is giftedness then?
Exactly, it sets the stage perfectly. And then we jump into this really interesting puzzle at West Point.
Yes, the military academy. They were apparently struggling to figure out why certain cadets who looked amazing on paper were washing out of beast barracks.
That notoriously tough initial training. Yeah.
And they had this super detailed score, the whole candidate score, academics, fitness, leadership, everything.
You'd think that would cover it, right? They'd have all the data they need.
You would. But, and here's the kicker, despite this really comprehensive system, they still couldn't predict who'd quit. Promising cadets were just leaving.
It wasn't adding up, which leads us to this key figure, Mike Matthews, a military psychologist there.
Right. And what did he observe?
Well, he noticed something crucial. It usually wasn't about ability. The cadets dropping out could do the work physically and mentally.
So it wasn't capability.
No. He pinpointed it as this never give up attitude. That was the real difference maker, perseverance, basically.
So after all that complex evaluation, it boiled down to just sticking with it. That's kind of shocking, isn't it?
It really is. And it echoes what the author found when interviewing leaders across all sorts of fields, business, arts, sports.
Diverse fields, yeah.
The common thread wasn't just talent. It was something more, this sort of hang-in-there posture when things got tough.
A hang in their posture. I like that phrase. And the studies at West Point actually backed this up with numbers, didn't they?
They absolutely did. Grit turned out to be a remarkably reliable predictor of completing beast barracks.
More reliable than the big comprehensive score.
Even more reliable. Which is pretty stunning when you think about all the factors packed into that whole candidate score. This one trait, grit, beat it.
Wow. And it wasn't just West Point, right? There's that study in Chicago schools.
Yeah, totally different context, same story. They looked at high school graduation predictors in Chicago public schools. And grit came out on top again. Stronger predictor than how much students said they cared about school or even how safe they felt.
That's huge. Safety is usually a big factor.
It is. And then you take it to another extreme, the Green Berets. They're selection courses designed to break people.
The ultimate test, basically.
Pretty much. And again, research there found grit was a key factor in who made it through. So the picture becomes clearer. Talent's important, sure, but this tenacity, this grit,
Yeah.
it often seems to be the deciding factor.
Which leads us nicely into this idea of being distracted by talent.
Exactly. We're sort of mesmerized by it as a society. And interestingly, the author mentions her own early clues about this came before her psychology work back when she was a teacher.
Oh, right. So she saw it in the classroom first.
Seems so. She saw firsthand that sometimes the kids who weren't obviously the smartest could outperform others through sheer effort.
That makes sense. And then there's her own story leaving that high-flying job at McKinsey
Yeah, the big consulting firm.
to become a teacher. That must have seemed like a strange move to her colleagues.
Well, absolutely. It kind of highlights this disconnect, doesn't it, between like the standard markers of success and maybe what brings personal fulfillment or aligns with deeper values.
Yeah, definitely. And then there's the story of David.
Oh, the student.
Right.
Yeah, the
That-
student who wasn't seen as particularly brilliant initially.
But then he aced that tough calculus course.
Aced it, got a perfect score on the AP exam, and went on to get degrees in engineering and economics.
It's a fantastic example of how initial judgments about aptitude can be way off, and how just sticking with something can lead to incredible results.
It really shows the danger of labeling people too early, maybe limiting their opportunities based on perceived talent.
And that's the core danger highlighted here. Overemphasizing talent makes us downplay other crucial things, especially grit.
We sort of send this message unintentionally that grit doesn't matter as much.
Right. Which the evidence just doesn't support. And the story of Scott Barry Kaufman is another powerful case.
The psychologist who struggled early on, faced big academic hurdles, was even in special ed. But he went on to get degrees from top universities and became an academic psychologist himself.
It just shows how embracing challenges and putting in the work can overcome what look like major limitations.
Totally. And remember that bit about the cello?
Oh, yeah. He practiced intensely, not necessarily out of love for the cello itself, but to prove.
To prove he was intellectually capable, he used it as a tool, fueled by drive and effort.
Such a vivid example.
It really is. So the takeaway isn't that talent is irrelevant. Of course it matters. But this section makes a strong case that effort is at least as important.
Maybe even more so, which leads to that next idea. Effort counts twice.
Exactly. Let's unpack that.
Okay, so the first point here is just how often we talk about talent. It's everywhere, right? Sports, music, business.
It really is. It's almost the default explanation for high achievement. We see someone amazing and just go, wow, so talented.
Yeah, it's like a shortcut that ignores all the hard work behind the scenes.
Totally obscures it sometimes, which is why that Will Smith quote is so striking.
What was it again?
He basically said, I outwork you. That's it.
Hmm.
He believes talent and skill aren't just given, they're built, hour by hour.
That's a powerful shift in perspective, puts the focus squarely on the work.
It really does. And think about the author's story with her advisor, Marty Seligman.
The famous psychologist.
Right.
What happened there?
Well, Seligman apparently told her, pretty bluntly, you haven't had a good idea in 2 years.
Ouch. That's harsh.
Definitely tough to hear, I imagine. But it drove home the point that even in super intellectual fields, consistent effort and contribution are non-negotiable.
You can't just rely on flashes of brilliance. You need to put in the work.
Precisely. And then there's that fascinating treadmill test study.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that one.
So they tested young men on a treadmill, basically seeing how long they'd push themselves before quitting when it got uncomfortable.
Okay. A measure of physical perseverance, kind of.
Exactly. And decades later, they found a correlation between how long those guys stuck it out on the treadmill and their overall psychological adjustment in life.
Decades later, what kind of adjustment?
Things like income, career success, even satisfaction with work and marriage. And it says this willingness to exert effort, even early on, has really long-term ripples.
Wow. So sticking it out on a treadmill could predict life success. That's unexpected.
It is, and it ties back to this idea that grit isn't just about the initial excitement for a goal.
It's more than just falling in love with the idea.
Right. It's about staying in love with it, sustained commitment, loyalty to what you care about, even when it's not fun or easy.
Okay, so how do we measure this? The material mentions the grit scale, right?
The author developed it. It's basically a self-assessment tool. You respond to statements about perseverance, like sticking with things even when you fail, and also about consistency of interests over time.
So it looks at both sticking power and focus.
Exactly. And it gives you a score,
Yeah.
often with percentile rankings, so you can see how you compare to others.
And it breaks grit down into two main parts.
Yes, passion and perseverance. Passion is that sustained interest, sticking with your goals over the long haul. Perseverance is the effort side, pushing through setbacks.
Got it. Passion and perseverance. And the grit scale can even give you separate scores for each.
Apparently so,
Hmm.
which could be useful for understanding your own strengths and weaknesses within the broader concept of grit.
Makes sense. And the example of Jeffrey Gettleman, the journalist.
Ah, the New York Times correspondent. Yeah, his story really embodies grit.
How so?
Well, becoming a top foreign correspondent, especially in a place like East Africa, is incredibly competitive and demanding. His journey took like a decade.
Decade?
Yeah, full of challenges, setbacks, probably moments of doubt. But he just kept at it, step by step, driven by that long-term goal. It wasn't overnight talent. It was pure grit.
Sustained passion for journalism plus incredible perseverance. That's a great illustration.
Definitely. Which brings us to the idea that passion and perseverance aren't mutually exclusive, but how they work together, especially when you have multiple goals.
Right, because most people are juggling more than one thing. Conventional prioritizing might not be enough.
That's the argument. When you have several really important high-level goals, you need more than just a to-do list. You need like an internal compass.
An internal compass.
Meaning your different goals should ideally serve some common, deeper purpose. They should align. The material mentions Warren Buffett's prioritization exercise.
The three-step one.
And it suggests adding a fourth step. really assessing how well your goals actually feed into that single overarching aim.
Okay, so it's about having a coherent goal hierarchy. That makes sense for staying focused long term.
Absolutely. It provides direction and makes it easier to stay motivated when things get tough across different areas.
And then the discussion shifts a bit to the classic nature versus nurture debate regarding grit.
Right. And the takeaway is pretty clear. It's always both. Every human trait is a mix of genes and experience.
Like the height example.
Exactly. Average height has increased over generations, not because our genes fundamentally changed overnight, but because of environmental factors like better nutrition. It shows how environment shapes even heritable traits.
So grit isn't just something you're born with or without. Your experiences shape it.
Definitely. Personality isn't fixed. We change through life, through learning, through the situations we encounter. The author's own career changes taught her about the satisfaction of expertise versus being a beginner, and about needing both passion and perseverance.
And that story about the headmaster's daughter and
Oh
punctuality.
yeah, that was a good one. She was apparently always late until she hit the working world, where the expectations were firm and non-negotiable.
And she changed her habits drastically.
It shows how much external environments and clear expectations can actually shape traits, like conscientiousness. We adapt.
Which ties into why people quit things. The material lists a few reasons.
Yeah, four main ones seem to pop up. Boredom, feeling the effort isn't worth the reward, deciding the goal isn't actually that important anymore, or losing faith in your ability to succeed.
Okay, those sound familiar.
Right. But here's the distinction. Greedy people might quit lower-level goals if they no longer serve the bigger picture.
But not their ultimate top-level goals.
Exactly. They don't tend to abandon those big guiding goals just because of temporary boredom or a setback. Their commitment runs deeper.
And the really hopeful message here is that grit can be grown. It's not fixed.
That's the key. Those four components, interest, practice, purpose, and hope, they aren't static. You can actively develop them. Grit can be cultivated from the inside out.
Okay, so let's get practical. How do we grow grit? Starting with interests.
Right. That common advice, follow your passion.
We hear it all the time, but the material adds some nuance, using the author's father as an example again.
Yeah, his career choice in science at DuPont seemed pragmatic at first, driven by necessity after his family lost their business.
But it eventually became his passion.
Exactly. So it raises that question. Does passion come first, or can it develop through engagement, even if the start was practical?
The chicken or the egg?
Pretty much.
Oh.
But regardless, the point is that matching what you do with what genuinely interests you, that generally improves your odds of being happy and successful. It's a good bet.
The passion isn't usually love at first sight, right? It takes time.
Definitely not. The material stresses that passions often need years of active cultivation. Early interests are fragile.
Fragile how?
But when you're starting out, you're usually more about exploring and having fun, not laser-focused on getting better or hitting huge goals. Even the top experts started as casual beginners.
That makes sense. And Benjamin Bloom's research on talent development fits here.
Perfectly. His early years stage is all about discovering and developing interest. Beginners need encouragement, freedom, small wins, a cause.
Not intense pressure and criticism right away.
Exactly. Pushing too hard too early can just kill that spark. You need to nurture it.
Like the Will Shortz example. The
Yeah.
puzzle editor.
Yeah. His passion started super early with a puzzle book right after he learned to read. And crucially, his mom supported it, gave him opportunities.
She got him a guitar, too, when he showed interest in music. That supportive environment seems key.
Absolutely. And then for sustaining interest long term, especially once you are an expert.
It's not just about finding totally new things.
Not necessarily. Often, it's about finding novelty within your field, discovering deeper layers, nuances, new complexities, like a long-married couple finding new depths in their relationship.
That's a great metaphor. Finding the new within the familiar.
And the author's running example, getting bored because she lacked variety, shows the flip side. You need that novelty, that continuous learning to keep the interest alive.
Okay, so interest is foundational, then comes practice, but not just any practice.
Deliberate practice, that
Yeah.
specific kind.
Right. Describe that again.
It's focused, effortful activity aimed squarely at improvement. It means identifying your weaknesses and pushing yourself just beyond your current capabilities. And importantly, it's often not fun in the moment.
Not fun. So, like, the opposite of flow.
In some ways, yeah. Think David Blaine, the magician. He credits his incredible feats to practice, training, experimenting, pushing through pain. Not magic, but deliberate effort.
Are those spelling bee kids?
Exactly. The research showed the top spellers spent tons of time on deliberate practice. Solitary memorization, studying dictionaries, word origins, stuff that's effective, but probably not inherently enjoyable for most kids.
So how does this relate to flow, that state of being completely absorbed and enjoying a challenge?
Well, the material mentions a panel with Csikszentmihalyi, Mr. Flow, and Anders Ericsson, Mr. Deliberate Practice. They highlighted the contrast. Flow often feels effortless, ecstatic, while deliberate practice involves effort, sometimes even feels like suffering.
So they're different experiences.
Very different. But, and this is important, deliberate practice can be deeply gratifying in its own way.
How so?
There's the satisfaction of seeing yourself get better, mastering something difficult, breaking down a challenge and overcoming it. It's a different kind of reward than flow, but still powerful.
And finding good coaches or mentors is key here.
Crucial. They help you focus your deliberate practice effectively and can guide you towards experiencing more flow as your skills improve. They bridge that gap.
Okay, interest, practice. Next up is purpose.
Right. Moving beyond just personal gain or pleasure.
So while pleasure matters to everyone, grittier people are more driven by purpose, like contributing to something bigger.
Significantly more so, according to the research. Higher purpose scores correlate strongly with higher grit scores.
And that research by Amy Wisniewski about job, career, or calling.
Yeah, that's really relevant. People see their work differently. Is it just a job, a necessity, a career, a stepping stone, or a calling? Deeply meaningful.
And those who see it as a calling tend to be grittier.
Much grittier. But the good news is, a calling isn't just about having a certain type of job. It's a perspective you can cultivate.
How do you do that?
By actively looking for connections. How does your work impact others? How does it fit into the bigger picture? How does it align with your core values? You can find purpose almost anywhere if you look for it.
Like that doctor, Michael Kearney.
Exactly. He found deeper purpose by starting a meditation class for patients, realizing connection and mindfulness were vital for their well-being. It changed his whole career path.
And Bill Damon's work on purpose in adolescence?
Yeah, the Stanford psychologist.
Yeah.
He defines purpose as the ultimate answer to why are you doing this? He finds that most people have a sense of purpose, even if it's not fully formed.
And how does purpose develop, according to him?
Often through social interaction. Being inspired by purposeful role models and having opportunities to actually contribute positively to others. Seeing the impact you can have.
The Kat Cole story fits here too, right? From Hooters server to CEO.
Absolutely. Her initial drive to help others might have been practical, better tips, but it evolved into a genuine sense of contribution and leadership that fueled her journey. Purpose can grow.
And having that purpose makes effort easier, even for boring tasks.
Research suggests so. When you connect what you're doing, even if it's tedious, to a larger goal, like making the world better, you find more self-control and persistence. Purpose fuels grit.
Okay, the final piece of the puzzle, hope.
Yes. Specifically, learned optimism.
Building on Seligman's learned helplessness work. So optimists see bad events as temporary and specific.
While pessimists see them as permanent and pervasive, affecting everything.
Right. And this affects performance, like the swimmers.
Yeah, that study was fascinating. Optimistic swimmers actually performed better after being told they did poorly, even though they hadn't. They bounced back from the perceived setback.
So greedy people tend to explain setbacks optimistically. They see them as learning chances.
Generally, yes. It's not about ignoring failure, but interpreting it in a way that allows you to keep going, rather than just giving up.
And Carol Dweck's mindset research is crucial here too. Fixed versus growth.
Absolutely fundamental. Fixed mindset. Abilities are set in stone. Growth mindset. Abilities can be developed through effort.
And you need a growth mindset for grit. Because setbacks aren't proof you're incapable.
They're just signs you need to learn more or try harder. It reframes challenges completely.
That attribution retraining study with kids seems key too. Teaching them to blame lack of effort, changeable, instead of lack of ability, fixed.
Led to more persistence when things got tough. It shows you can actually teach a more hopeful, growth-oriented way of thinking about failure.
And parents play a big role, sometimes unintentionally.
Yeah, reacting to mistakes as if they're catastrophic can foster a fixed mindset in kids, even if the parents say they believe in growth. Actions speak louder.
It even applies to companies, right? Fixed mindset cultures versus growth mindset ones.
Definitely. Fixed mindset cultures often focus only on stars, leading to secrecy, maybe cutting corners. Growth mindset cultures tend to have more trust, more investment in developing everyone.
So embracing growth is core to being gritty, believing people can get better.
Exactly. Like Bill McNabb observed at Vanguard, the leaders who thrived long-term were the curious ones, the ones who saw setbacks as learning opportunities, not the end of the world.
And that research with the rats and controllable stress.
Desayr's work, yeah. Rats that overcame controllable stress early on became more resilient to uncontrollable stress later. It suggests successively navigating challenges literally builds resilience in the brain.
So how do we actively cultivate hope?
Practicing optimistic self-talk, consciously challenging negative thoughts, thinking about how others overcame adversity, resilience training, often based on cognitive behavioral therapy, can help too.
And that wild story about Grit Young and the sit-ups.
Oh man, 10,000 consecutive sit-ups. That's an extreme example of perseverance driven by, well, something internal. Hope that he could achieve it, maybe.
Incredible dedication. So shifting gears slightly, how does parenting influence grit?
The idea of wise parenting comes up, being both supportive and demanding, like the parents of Steve Young or Francesca Martinez, love and high expectations combined.
It's not just about kids imitating parents, but emulating them.
Right. When parents are loving, respectful, but also have high standards, kids tend to internalize those values more deeply and are more likely to pursue similar challenging interests themselves, like pianists having kids take piano, or tennis players pushing tennis.
And peers and mentors matter, too, like Cody Coleman's story.
Yeah, a supportive brother and a wise teacher made a huge difference for him. Positive external influences are powerful.
And what about sticking with activities? That research on extracurriculars.
Warren Willingham's Personal Qualities Project, super interesting, found that follow-through in high school activities, sticking with a few things for years and achieving something in them, predicted college success and later life accomplishments, better than grades or SATs sometimes.
Better than SATs. Wow, they measured this with the grit grid.
Yeah, looking at both participation length and level of achievement in those multi-year commitments. Higher scores meant better outcomes.
And personality isn't fixed after childhood. It keeps evolving.
That's what the research suggests. The corresponsive principle, situations and traits influence each other, leading to virtuous or vicious cycles. We can change.
Which fits with how someone like Bill Fitzsimmons at Harvard looked at admissions, right? Valuing more than just grades.
Exactly. Looking for that genuine interest, that sustained commitment shown through activities, he recognized those qualities matter for long-term success.
And while a lot of this research isn't strictly experimental,
which is always a caveat with complex human behavior.
the patterns are pretty consistent, like the author's family hard thing rule.
Yeah, everyone has to do something that requires daily deliberate practice, fosters that culture of perseverance.
And joining a gritty team can make you grittier.
It seems so. The culture rubs off. You adapt to the norms and values of the group.
Finally, that Finnish concept, sisu.
Right, that extra gear of perseverance, that stubborn belief you can overcome anything through sheer will, gutful determination.
Pete Carroll tried to build that into the Seahawks culture.
Yeah, deliberately fostering that gritty mindset.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, there are still open questions, maybe even downsides to extreme grit.
The material acknowledges that, yeah, like the author's daughters finding the focus on deliberate practice challenging sometimes. It's not always easy living with a gritty mom, apparently.
And crucially, grit isn't about being mindlessly stubborn.
No, absolutely not. It includes the wisdom to reassess, even quit lower-level goals if they don't serve the ultimate purpose anymore. It's strategic perseverance.
But an epidemic of grit seems unlikely. Most of us struggle with sticking things out.
That seems fair to say. Consistent passion and perseverance are hard.
So the final thought for listeners, think about that balance of passion and perseverance in your own life. What are your hard things? What's the purpose driving you?
Or maybe mull over that idea of sisu, that inner reserve to push past limits. Do you have more of it than you think? It's a powerful concept to consider.
Well, thank you for joining us on this really insightful deep dive into grit.
My pleasure. It's a fascinating topic.
We've seen how passion plus perseverance often seems to outweigh sheer talent, right? From West Point to schools to careers.
Definitely. And the key takeaway is that it's not fixed. You can grow it, cultivate interest, practice deliberately, find purpose, nurture hope.
And your mindset, your upbringing, the culture around you, it all plays a part.
Huge parts.
So we really hope listeners will reflect on how these ideas connect to their own goals and challenges.
Yeah, maybe think about your own grit scale score, or map out your goal hierarchy, or just research Sisu some more. Lots to chew on.
Absolutely. Thanks again for diving deep with us today.